Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in. That's what I want to know. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson. Hello and welcome back to the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Dark kitchens, ghost kitchens, smart kitchens. Maybe you've heard these terms before, maybe you haven't. This episode opens a conversation on what they are and what they're not. Arin Aghazarian is the General Manager of Chef Collective, a leading smart kitchen operator in Australia, and oversees the business development, operations, and customer success functions. After completing her MBA, Arin worked as a management consultant with Kearney Dubai on large strategy turnaround projects for telecom and media companies. She then led Global Development and M&A for Burger King and Tim Hortons in Asia Pacific, and was behind their multi-million dollar deals with Affinity Equity Partners and Nexxus Capital. Additionally, prior to working with Chef Collective, she also led the successful launch of Popeyes Louisiana Kitchen into China and the Philippines as the APAC General Manager. It's a great episode today, and I hope you enjoy it. Hello and welcome to the show, Arin.
Thanks for having me. Really excited about it.
It's a pleasure to have you on. You've got a really interesting background and now doing some very fascinating work in a space that has various opinions on it as well, but certainly a trend that is happening in the food space. I'm really excited to actually open that up and hear more from you directly about Chef Collective. The first question that I like to ask on the program is a crazy hospitality story or exceptional hospitality experience. I'd love to know what you have brought to the program today.
I don't know if I have an exceptional hospitality story, but I have a funny hospitality story that was a bit of a disaster. It was how I started in hospitality, and that was when I started with Tim Hortons in Canada. I had 2 weeks of training in the restaurant and I was doing different stations. The coffee station was fine. And then I moved to the donut station. That was also fine. And then I moved to the milk and creamer station, which honestly should be quite easy. But somehow I had an issue with the machine because it constantly went to cream and I had to press the button to go to milk and it would automatically go back to cream. And every time I made a mistake, the whole cream was splashing all over the counter. And every time I made a mistake, my manager would just say, "It's okay, don't worry about it. Just put your drink in the back. And then when you're on your break, you can just have it yourself." So I was like, "Okay, thank you very much," and stuff. And then an hour, 2 hours later, I went to the back to get my break and the entire table was filled with me making wrong drinks. So sorry to the restaurant manager and thank you for being nice about it. The next day I was better, but that's how I started in the hospitality industry.
Wow, it sounds like your manager was very supportive and understanding as well. I know that I've certainly heard experiences about managers that wouldn't have acted so nicely in that experience as well.
I guess. And I think maybe she was used to this kind of behavior. So from a first timer. So yeah, she was very understanding.
Very good. Thank you for sharing your story. And you've come a very long way from there too. I'm excited to hear a bit more from you. Just before we open up a little more on the technical aspect of what it is that you do now, I'd like to know what it is that really inspires you. Why do you do what you do?
I think that there's two things on how I got here and why I'm doing this. I think just from a professional growth perspective, I want to be somewhere that was innovating. I want to be creating something new, doing something that nobody had done before, or I couldn't look at somebody else and say, "What did they do? Let me copy it." I had to really solve my own problems. So that's why I decided to go into the cloud kitchen space because it was very new. It was the innovation, the next step of F&B and real estate that I think not many people at that time were focusing on. But I think that also, and I'll talk a little bit about what inspired me, it was really helping entrepreneurs achieve their goals, achieve their dreams. And I think being in F&B for a long time, I realized that it's not an easy industry to be in. The failure rates are quite high, but also the cost of starting is quite high. The risk is high. So what we're providing is a low risk, low investment model for entrepreneurs to start their dreams and potentially make this a success and grow it.
Fantastic. Let's open a little bit more on what it is that you're doing. And I guess explaining what Chef Collective does is going to be probably the best move forward from here to connect that up, because you've explained why, but in actually executing that and exactly what you just described, a low-cost way for entrepreneurs to start. Can you tell us what that actually is?
Yeah, Chef Collective is, in a quick way, a cloud kitchen or a dark kitchen. There are different terms that describe it. What we do is we buy, let's say, underutilized or unloved properties that are close to residential areas, and then we turn those into economic hubs for FME. What we do is we turn those into 20 to 25 commercial kitchens. We equip those kitchens with all the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing components that are quite expensive, all the piping, tiling work. And then we even provide all the basic equipment. So exhaust hood, air con, walk-in chillers and freezers and sinks. And we basically license those out to restaurants. Restaurants would come in, put in with anywhere between $10,000 to $15,000. They would give us as a refundable one-time fee. They would bring in their specialized equipment, their own fryers or hoods, depending on what they're cooking, and then they would start. So they can even rent out those equipment, so really reducing their upfront cost. So instead of if you go to a brick and mortar, putting in $500,000, $1 million, depending on how big the location is, fitting it out, signing a 5-year lease, you're coming to us, putting in $10,000 to $15,000 upfront, signing a 1-year term, and you can start within 2 weeks. Also, for anybody who has bought a property and tried to change its use and turn it into a kitchen or a restaurant, they would know that getting approval from council and construction, et cetera, it takes a long time in Australia, about a year, I would say. So cutting that down to 2 weeks really saves restaurants a lot of time, reduces the risk. So I think that's the main gist of it, reducing the upfront costs. Cash is king in restaurants, reducing that risk and reducing the time to operate.
You mentioned there before around having 25 restaurants or brands or chefs. Just to understand that a little bit more, is that 25 different brands inside that one space?
Not brands, it's 25 different kitchens with likely 25 different chefs. But the brand part, actually, this is an interesting thing, is you can have as many brands as you want within that kitchen. And this is one of our USPs as well. And we definitely do recommend it to restaurants. It's because you're behind closed doors, because you don't have that direct access to the consumer or they're not seeing it, you can put as many brands as you want within that kitchen. If I give you an idea, for example, if you go to a restaurant and they're selling Japanese food and Italian food, or let's not get that extreme, but Italian food and Mexican food, you would still say they're having an identity crisis. They're likely not good at either. But actually, there's a lot of components that can be reused between those two cuisines, right? Similar, let's say you're using egg in one, you can use egg, cheese in one, you can use it again. Tomatoes, you can use. So a lot of those components you can reuse. So if you are able to do multiple brands from the same kitchen, nobody would really know and nobody would judge you. So you can create multiple brands, virtual brands from the same kitchen and utilize your ingredients to differentiate yourself. I think the component is not only cuisines. I think that's a bit of an extreme. But within the same cuisine, you can also do different day parts. For example, if you're doing Greek food, you're able to do platters. That's more of a dinner type of thing or maybe catering type of menu. You can make bowls, healthy bowls with Greek ingredients. That's more of a lunch type of day part. And you can make sandwiches, gyros or souvlaki. And you can also do that for a lunch day part or dinner day part. But the price point for each of those will be also different. And people, if somebody order from you for the bowl, they will feel like they're ordering something different at night if they order the platter. So those multiple brands are actually one of the USPs of cloud kitchens.
It could in the ability for a venue to premiumize. And by having a kitchen, it gets a bit complicated with the terminology, but I guess a brand behind the brands that they have with you, because you're going to have an entity that comes in, that entity to offer premium products or a budget product that could be otherwise in another commercial space could only offer a high-end price point.
100%.
Yeah, it allows them to diversify, which is really interesting as well. Could you tell us more about how you actually came to do what it is that you do? I've read a bit on your background, but for listeners to understand a bit more, tell us around that journey. You've just told us a story at the beginning, but I'd like to know how you actually went through the evolution to become the general manager of Chef Collective.
it was a little bit by chance how I got into hospitality or F&B. So I was doing my MBA in Chicago, and I actually was planning to go into tech. So I started my journey. I can go a little bit even further. I was in management consulting. Next step was for me to get an MBA. I went to my MBA, and my idea was to go into tech. So I did my internship at Google. I got an offer, but then I was on campus, and Burger King, who was at the time, new company, new management had come into the company, came on campus, and I just went out of curiosity, and I just loved what they were talking about. It was this very young team. The CEO was 30 years old at the time. The CFO was 26. They were hiring a lot of MBAs and trying to change how QSR fast food is done. And I drank the Kool-Aid, I would say. So I left my tech dreams and I said, wow, this company is a company for me. And I was hired to go to Miami. And I was like, yay, Miami, it's a dream. I was going to start like 10 months later. I was still to graduate from my MBA. And they called me up 2 months before I started. And they said, hey, guess what? We acquired this company in Canada, Tim Hortons, which is the biggest coffee chain in Canada. And we have positions in Toronto. Would you be open to move? And I was like, okay, sure. I've never been to Canada before, but hey, why not? So I moved to Toronto. I had never been there before. I started my journey in Tim Hortons international business. It was quite small at the time. We only had like locations in the Middle East. So I just carved a path for me there. I was looking at their marketing. And then literally the day I went to work and I felt, I finally know what I'm doing today. They called me into an office and they said, your role's changing. We are creating this role to expand the Tim Hortons business globally. So you're going to go and basically find partners for our master franchise businesses. So then I started to travel around finding high net worth individuals or private equities who would want to take up the Tim Hortons brands and expand in different markets. We were able to sign the deal in the Philippines, deal in the UK and in Mexico. And then for personal reasons, I want to move to Asia or meaning to Singapore. They were not kind enough to move me to Singapore. So I moved here and I switched to still business development, but for Burger King as well. So Burger King was also the same company. So I started to travel around Asia and selling the Burger King brand and the Tim Hortons brand to anybody who wanted master franchise rights. And then once I got comfortable with that role, they moved me into operations. And I moved to, at that point in time, we had bought Popeyes, the fried chicken chain. And I became the GM for Popeyes in Asia. So working with franchisees to grow their businesses. While I was there, I started to realize how difficult it is to run an F&B business. The margins are quite small. The difficulties are quite high, especially on focus on manpower, the ingredients, the consistency. It's really a lot of details that you need to focus on. I could see even for a huge brand like Popeyes that some of our restaurants weren't doing as well. And I could see how restaurants were coming in, opening up, and then not being able to cope and leave. And I thought to myself one day, I want to be in this industry, but I want to be doing something else. This industry hasn't evolved that much. I could see year on year delivery volumes increasing at the expense of dine-in. This is pre-COVID, and I knew that delivery was going to be big. Actually, pre-COVID, I decided to switch into cloud kitchens, and then COVID happened. And everything that we were expecting to happen in 2025 happened in 2020. It just accelerated the growth of delivery. I would say that we definitely in the right place at the right time. I had made the switch to go into this new innovative part of F&B, and I would say that I was in the right place.
Interesting, because I remember looking at what you were doing before COVID, and then it's completely, obviously, revolutionized the world. And you have absolutely been in the right place at the right time to capitalize on those macroeconomic changes. You mentioned there around one of those changes is in labor and in the hospitality industry and huge staff shortages that we're certainly experiencing with these migrations around the world from people either back to their home countries or deciding to change country entirely that they live in. We've got a big staff shortage in Australia. We talked a bit about this before recording today. You mentioned that the shift in your business has also been to include things that do assist with that, with venues, particularly in Australia. And we talked a bit about some previous guests as well, and that they might be doing something similar. Can you tell us about what that actually is?
Yeah, I think at the heart of it, because what we're doing is basically you don't have that dine-in component, in our business and you don't have that customer facing part of the business because we'll do that for you, you don't need that many people in cloud kitchen. All you need is 1 or 2 chefs in the kitchens and that's it. You don't need a restaurant manager. You don't need like waiters. You don't need a cashier. So definitely there is a reduction in labor for the cloud kitchen business than you would have in a normal brick and mortar. But we're now seeing a different trend in the industry, which is consolidation. Because there is a shortage of manpower and that's a fact. What we're seeing is instead of opening up a lot of different brick and mortars, what they're doing is they're getting prep kitchens. So a lot of the items are being prepared in a prep kitchen and then shipped out to their brick and mortar restaurants to make it much easier in the brick and mortar, the hub and spoke and at the spokes to create the foods. Let's say you are a bowl player, right? And you make different bowls. You don't need to chop your lettuce in the restaurant. You don't need to create your sauce at the restaurant. All of these can be prepared so that your staff at the restaurant can just assemble. So what we're seeing and we're definitely encouraging is that people are taking spaces from us for prep kitchen specifically. So instead of using it as only delivery kitchen, they take these spaces, they prep their food for their brick and mortar. And if they have in their downtime some time, they can also turn on their delivery tablets and then send out delivery. So it's like a mixed use space for restaurants.
You mentioned there around some trends. I'm going to ask you one trend that you pulled out there. I'd like to address that in just a moment. On this shift with this removal of the front of house and just dealing with the back of house, how does that change customer service in F&B?
That's a very good question or a very good observation. You need to go digital. I think that anyway, now our way of consuming food is becoming digital. And the way we choose a restaurant is becoming digital. What I mean is we likely look on Instagram, we see some really Instagrammable restaurant, or we see some Instagrammable food, all these colorful Bali style food. And that's how we end up going to a restaurant. We look at their reviews on Google, their amount of followers on Instagram, and that's how we're choosing where to go. At the restaurant, you would, of course, focus on the service. But then what you do in delivery is you have to take that service digitally as well. Your packaging needs to be appealing, needs to be nice. You shouldn't have spillage. You need to have a nice logo that you put it and you engage with your customer. Put a note in the order, in the bag, and tell them your story. We are 2 brothers. We're of Vietnamese heritage. We learned our recipes from our mother and we started this business. So people want to relate to that story. I see some people going above and beyond. They make a playlist on Spotify and then give you the playlist in a card. And then while you're eating, for example, the pizza, you can hear some like nice Italian tunes in the back. So it becomes much more of that. You have to engage with your customer digitally. When you see a comment from somebody on Instagram, you definitely have to reply. If you see a comment on Google, whether good or bad, you definitely have to reply. And the other thing that we're seeing that is really interesting, and we can talk a little bit more about, we provide a tech in the kitchen, which can help you define if this customer is a repeat customer. In brick and mortar, unfortunately, you don't have the data of this customer. This customer comes in, they order, they go. You don't know who they are. They don't know if they were there before. They don't know what they ordered. Whereas digitally, you have a track record of this customer and what they ordered before. So you know if they keep coming to you, you can send a note saying, thank you very much for ordering again. Maybe last time they ordered some drink, you can just put it as a drink again because they know they liked it. So definitely there's this component that because you have more data, you can customize your service that in brick and mortar you won't be able to do.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because my first business was in that space. I'm actually looking at doing something very similar again. So interesting that you bring that up too. And certainly data in the space is huge and continuing to grow, not just in the space, but generally. You only have to Google big data to realize how huge the world is now and where things are moving. Thank you for fleshing that out a bit more too. To address that question from before, what other trends are you seeing in the industry?
I think definitely this data-driven approach is one that is a big focus. I think in F&B, data was getting lost, and I think people are becoming much more aware of that and customizing their menus based on what people like. Previously, you would see, go to a restaurant and their menu would be 50 pages long. So they don't know what you like. So they just put everything on the menu. And now I think people are being much more cognizant of what's selling, what's not selling well, what do people actually want, and customizing those menus specifically for that. We provide a tech in our kitchens that consolidates the different delivery platforms. So instead of having a tablet for Uber Eats, one for DoorDash, one for Deliveroo, etc., you combine them all into one and it will spit out the data for you live. It will tell you what time you're sold, where you sold, how much of what you sold. That way people are much more cognizant of this and they can customize their menu and provide things that people actually want. We talked about the other trend is definitely the virtual brands, people creating brands that are, again, Instagrammable, catchy, saucy, something that flashy colors that could be a bit controversially named. Those are really catching people's attention because just Instagrammable food or anything Instagrammable is a big trend right now and has been. Yeah, I think those two are some of the things that I would say that's where the industry is going.
Do you think that the nature of this democratized marketing and business world that we're now living in is educating people more in marketing, and the fact that anyone can start an Instagram page or Snapchat or TikTok and explode and become someone who does really well in the brave new world we live in this marketing space?
Yes. First of all, I love your question because 100% this democratization is a fantastic thing that is giving people opportunity. Otherwise, they wouldn't. If we look at brick and mortar, for example, previously, your biggest marketing tool would be your space. You get in a high street location, you get a site, Flinders Lane in Melbourne, right? I'm sure you're paying quite a bit on your rent, but that's going to be, it's also your part of your marketing tool because people are just walking there and then they're seeing you and then they're going in. But not everybody can afford that. You're going to put your entire life savings, likely you're going to borrow to be able to open a restaurant there. Whereas right now, all the marketing is being done digitally. I would say that also digital marketing gives you also more data. Otherwise, previously you would put thing on TV, for example, an ad on TV or even on the streets. You don't know how many people saw it and you don't know how many people actually came to your restaurant specifically because they saw your ad. Whereas now when you're advertising online, first of all, it's much cheaper because it's like cost per click a lot of the times. And the second thing is really actionable. So let's say right now, if you in delivery, your best bet in getting your money's worth would be to advertise on the delivery platforms because people are already there. I'm hungry. I already opened DoorDash or Uber Eats and I want to order. Now I'm going to decide what I'm going to order. Nobody's really thinking, I really want to order this pizza from this specific place, or it doesn't happen that often. Usually people are just like, I'm hungry. I'm going to open the delivery app and then decide where I'm going to order from. And when you're advertising in the delivery platform, you're getting better conversion for what you're spending because you can see that somebody clicked on you and then they went to order. So you know that whatever you're spending is actually going into sales. So it becomes cheaper to advertise, but you're right about democratizing things as well, because as long as you have a nice camera, as long as you know a little bit of design, you can use Canva as well, right? You can create a nice Instagram page and put this, I would say Instagrammable or like really this food that you want to eat right now. So appealing on Instagram and people are going to come, which otherwise I think before you had to do like heavy photography, really put a lot of money into it. And I think that just the cost is decreasing and more people can get into the space, definitely.
And there are so many structural changes there, even thinking about the role of the photographer. And there's, just to mention one, this democratized, decentralized nature of the world that we're in now and where we're trending towards makes me want to ask and constantly think about what the future of food does really look like, and that consumption that you described there, this digital consumption. Yes, we're moving more and more into, I guess, the balance of consumption is increasing from a digital space and very much delivery platforms and people not actually going to, or rather the value in going to a venue is being blurred by the allure of getting delivery, right? And so venues have had to capitalize on that to ensure that they survive and some of them thrive. And in what you do, it's just that, right? There's no physical space for people to attend. It's a different space you operate in. I'd like to open it a bit more, just in the last latter end of the episode, a bit about what you're all learning about or exploring at the moment. So what is it that and I'm deliberately keeping it broad, I always do. I'd like to know how you interpret that question. What is it that you're learning about or exploring at the moment?
I think because I want to be in this innovation space, my job is constantly evolving, and we also need to evolve with how the market evolves. So delivery is still on the rise. I think there's a little bit of perception that after COVID, it went down, but actually I'm seeing growth month on month. It's really amazing. I think once people got used to the habit of ordering, they're continuing to order. Of course, that like how we change based on the market. So manpower shortage. So now we're focusing more on that prep kitchen. But also we are looking at how can we make it even easier for restaurants, right? We just launched, for example, in Brisbane, a fully fitted kitchen, right? So we'll give you all the equipment as well, and you can start it out. I don't know if necessarily people want that. People might want customization. We're going to see how that works out. We're even going above and beyond and saying, okay, maybe some people don't want to commit to a 1-year term. Maybe some people want to try it out first, get out of their house, cook in our locations. And we're calling it like casual kitchen so people can rent by the day, or every Monday you come and use the same space. So these are like some of the products we're exploring. On the customer success side as well, we're looking at how else we can support our restaurants. One of the things that keeps happening, for example, is cancellations on delivery or some refunds. So I don't know if you order like a sandwich with chips and the chips doesn't come, and then you say my chips didn't come, and automatically the delivery platform will refund you. So looking at those refunds and seeing if there is room for our restaurants to look into them better and understand if there was any wrongful refunds, for example. So definitely supporting them on the operational side, supporting restaurants on better managing, like knowing their data. For example, knowing when your delivery platform was on or off, right? That way, I don't know if you're not in the kitchen, but your staff is there. Did they turn off the platform or were they always on? So those things, again, more operational data right now that we're focusing on with restaurants to help them optimize their businesses better. Because again, you're in F&B, so you know, or you were in F&B, so you know that the margins are so small that every cent counts. So we're helping restaurants with those like small incremental sales, but also incremental savings.
Arin, what is your biggest challenge right now? This is around what's actually giving you friction. What is it that's causing you to work through and look at some of those things that you are learning about right now?
I think that this is not hospital related, but my biggest challenge is how fast we can grow. I think, as I mentioned, one of the things that we're solving for is how fast restaurants can go to market, but that also applies to us. So obviously, right now we're in Melbourne, we're in Brisbane, we have a few more locations coming in Sydney and Melbourne. It's about how fast these locations can come. But of course, given that we're buying the properties and there's going to be a lot of hurdles to cross because we are creating this new asset class, it takes us some time. So if I were to just snap my fingers and get 10 more locations across Australia, I would. But unfortunately, there are some hurdles to go through. So I guess that's my biggest challenge, not being able to grow fast enough.
And you described earlier on in the interview around some of the hurdles where if a venue was to do it on their own, or a brand or individual or entity was to do it on their own, they'd have to jump through some of those hoops in all sorts of ways. But you've got some other cogs in the machine that you've got to work with as well to make sure it all aligns for, as you said, unique asset class. It's interesting to hear that. Is there anything specifically that you're doing to work through that challenge?
I think for every location that we open, we are becoming much more educated about some of the questions that are going to come from council. What are the things that they are worried about? What are the things that we have to address? For example, some of the worries are about the traffic that we might cause or the pollution that we might cause. But if you look at it, like even if you're putting that many restaurants, but these are smaller restaurants, first of all, we don't create that much traffic. I think people think that we're going to put 25 McDonald's in one location, which is not the case. But the other thing is also really working on innovation from our side so that environmentally on any kind of pollution, whether it's environmental or noise, etc., we have solutions. And we actually do, because all our locations are designed specifically for this. So we have enough parking space. So we have the right engineering techniques to make sure that we're not polluting and we're only throwing like cleansed gases back. So all these things are very top of mind.
Fantastic. Thank you for opening that up a little bit more. I really appreciate your insights on the show today, Arin. I'd love to know just a final question for the day, and that's, who would you like to hear on the show?
Of course, for us, it's the delivery platforms are one of the big ones that a lot of restaurants were reliant on completely over the last few years, and delivery is not going anywhere. Definitely one of the GMs from Uber Eats or DoorDash that I want to hear more about what's the plan over the next few years now that maybe COVID's a little bit gone, but delivery is still there. How can we work together to make sure that everybody wins? Delivery platforms win, but also restaurants win.
Amazing. You'll be pleased to hear that Rebecca Burrows from DoorDash is coming up on the show between now and when this episode comes out. Thank you again for joining me on the program today, Arin. It's been an absolute pleasure interviewing you today, learning. It was very insightful, and I wish you all the very best into the future.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.